Daniel Foster hated airports in the same way most people hated waiting rooms. Nothing terrible happened in them. Nothing memorable either. They were places designed to erase time. The chairs were almost comfortable. The coffee was almost good. The announcements were almost understandable. By the time a gate agent finally called his boarding group, he usually felt as though someone had quietly stolen an hour from his life and replaced it with fluorescent lighting. This Tuesday was no different. He bought an overpriced turkey sandwich because it was there. He checked the same email 3 times because he had nothing else to do. He replied to a message from his boss with 3 words: "We'll handle tomorrow." Tomorrow. He smiled faintly at the phrase. It was everyone's favorite promise. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked through the terminal windows. Rain streaked across the glass. Somewhere beyond it sat Flight 281, another anonymous aluminum tube carrying anonymous people between anonymous Tuesdays. The woman beside him glanced at his boarding pass. "Going home?" Daniel looked up. "I hope so." She laughed politely. "So do I." That was the entire conversation. They would never speak again. He boarded with Group 4. The flight attendant greeted him with professional enthusiasm that somehow sounded both genuine and rehearsed. "Welcome aboard." "Thanks." Seat 21A. Window. His favorite. Not because of the view. Because no one asked him to get up. He stowed his backpack beneath the seat and settled in. Across the aisle, a college student struggled to fit an enormous duffel bag into the overhead compartment. Behind him, a toddler announced to the aircraft that he had seen an airplane. Plane. His mother congratulated him. An older man unfolded a newspaper despite carrying a tablet. Someone laughed 3 rows back. Someone else coughed. A ringtone chirped briefly before disappearing. Normal. Wonderfully, forgettably normal. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Flight time today will be approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes. Daniel stopped listening. Every pilot sounded comforting. Not because of what they said, because they always sounded as though they'd done this 1,000 times. Maybe they had. The engines awakened beneath the floor. A vibration spread through the cabin. The aircraft pushed away from the gate. Outside, rain blurred the runway lights into long golden smears. Daniel watched baggage carts become smaller. The terminal drifted away, then the acceleration. He always loved this part. The moment when thousands of pounds of impossible engineering decided that gravity was merely a suggestion. The city tilted. Roads became threads. Cars became dust. Clouds swallowed everything. 10 minutes later, the seatbelt sign chimed off. People stood immediately, as if remaining seated had become physically impossible. The drink cart appeared. Daniel accepted black coffee. The flight attendant smiled. "Long day?" "They're all starting to blend together. I know the feeling." He almost asked how many flights she'd worked that week. Instead, he thanked her. She moved on. He opened his laptop. The spreadsheet waited exactly where he'd left it. Rows, columns, dates, deadlines. A project that would be forgotten 6 months after it was finished. He stared at it for perhaps 30 seconds before closing the computer again. Not today. He rested his forehead against the window. Nothing but clouds. White mountains no one would ever climb. The engines hummed. Steady. Almost musical. Without realizing it, Daniel fell asleep. He awoke because the coffee had spilled. Only a little. Enough to dampen his sleeve. He blinked. The cup rested crookedly on the tray. Cold now. The cabin lights had dimmed. Outside. Sunset. Orange clouds stretched endlessly beneath them. He rubbed his eyes. How long had he been asleep? He reached for his phone. No signal. Expected. The time read 8:17. Expected. He yawned, then frowned. It was quiet. Not airplane quiet. Different. No conversations. No coughing. No children. No rustling magazines. Only the engines. He looked across the aisle. Empty. The college student's seat. Empty. The newspaper. Gone. He turned around. Rows. Rows of seats. Blankets. Open tray tables. Half-finished drinks. A paperback lying face down. No people. His pulse stumbled. Hello? No answer. He stood. The movement felt strangely loud. Hello? His own voice echoed farther than it should have. He walked toward the front. Seat after seat. Empty. Someone's reading glasses rested neatly on a folded jacket. A pair of headphones hung from an armrest. A shoe. Just one. As though its owner had intended to come right back. Daniel laughed once. A nervous, involuntary sound. Very funny. Silence. He reached the galley. No flight attendants. Coffee pots still warm. Plastic cups stacked perfectly. One meal tray sat half assembled, the bread roll still wrapped, butter unopened, a tiny square of chocolate waiting beside the napkin, as if someone had simply stopped. The forward lavatory was empty, the second one too. He opened every compartment. Nothing. His breathing became faster. No. He hurried toward the cockpit. The reinforced door stood slightly open. That was wrong, very wrong. He pushed it. It swung inward. The cockpit was empty. Both seats empty. Headsets hung where they belonged. Switches glowed. Displays shimmered with green and amber information he couldn't understand. Outside the windshield, clouds, endless clouds. The airplane remained perfectly level. The controls moved slightly on their own. Tiny corrections. Autopilot. Daniel stared. No. He stepped inside. Come on. He looked behind the seats, under them, as though two pilots might somehow be hiding. The radio hissed softly. Nothing else. He grabbed the microphone. Mayday. His voice cracked. Mayday, mayday, this is Flight 281. If anyone can hear me. Static. I'm alone. Static. I need help. Nothing. He tried another frequency. Another. Only the endless whisper of empty air. His breathing had become shallow. His hands shook. This wasn't possible. People did not vanish. Entire airplanes did not become empty. He returned to the cabin. More slowly this time. Searching. Looking beneath seats. Opening overhead bins. Calling. Listening. Nothing. By the time he reached the middle of the aircraft, panic had settled into something colder. Confusion. Because panic expects something to happen. Confusion simply waits. It was then he noticed the shoes. Brown leather. Perfectly polished. At the very back, a person, sitting in the last row, facing forward, perfectly still. Daniel froze. Relief arrived first, then suspicion, then relief again. Hey. No movement. Hey. He hurried down the aisle. The man wore a gray jacket, dark trousers, hands folded neatly in his lap. His hair was silver around the temples. Perhaps 60 years old, perhaps older. He looked out the window, not turning, not blinking. Daniel stopped beside him. Oh, thank God. The man nodded once. I wondered when you'd wake up. Daniel laughed with exhausted relief. What happened? They left. Daniel waited. The man said nothing else. What do you mean they left? They aren't here. I can see that. Yes. Daniel stared. Were you asleep too? No. You saw them leave? Yes. How? They left. Daniel felt irritation replacing fear. You're going to have to give me more than that. The man remained looking through the window. I've already given you the answer. Daniel followed his gaze. Outside, the sun had almost disappeared. Clouds glowed deep crimson. Beautiful. Impossible to appreciate. He looked back. Who are you? My name is Elias. Okay, Elias. Daniel crouched so they were eye level. My name is Daniel. I know. You know me? Yes. How? You told me. I've never seen you before. Elias nodded gently. I know. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. Something about the man's voice was unsettling. Not because it sounded strange, because it sounded completely ordinary. Like a neighbor explaining tomorrow's weather. No mystery, no excitement, only certainty. Daniel stood again. Can you fly this plane? No. Do you know how? No. Then why aren't you panicking? A long pause. Then, I was. Daniel frowned. What changed? Elias finally looked away from the window. Just enough for Daniel to see his eyes. They weren't frightening. They were simply tired. I realized, Elias said quietly, that panic and understanding cannot live in the same room for very long. He turned back toward the sunset. Neither man spoke. The engines continued their endless song. Outside, the last sliver of daylight disappeared beneath the horizon, and somewhere ahead of them, night was already waiting. Night arrived all at once. One moment, the clouds beneath the aircraft still held a faint orange glow. The next, they were black. Not dark gray, not hidden by shadow. Black, like ink poured over the world. Daniel had flown enough to know nights over the ocean could feel empty, but this was different. Usually there were pinpricks of light somewhere below. A distant town, a ship, a highway threading across the land. Tonight there was nothing. No stars above, no moon, no lights below. Only the blinking navigation light on the wingtip, faithfully marking the edge of an airplane that seemed to have wandered outside the rest of creation. He looked at Elias. You've seen this before. Yes. How many times? I stopped counting. Daniel swallowed. What day is it? I don't know. No, really. I answered honestly. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't know what day it is. I don't know if days are still happening. He returned to the cockpit. If there was any chance this was real, there had to be instruments that could prove it. Altitude, 37,000 feet. Airspeed, normal. Heading, a number that meant nothing to him. Fuel. He stared. The indicator was just above half. That couldn't be right. He remembered glancing at the captain's display while boarding once years ago. Commercial aircraft didn't carry endless fuel. 3-hour flight, maybe 4, not forever. He pulled out his phone calculator. If they'd departed around 5, if he'd slept, if the sun set. No. He looked at the clock on the instrument panel. 10:42. He looked at his phone. 10:42. At least they agreed. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. The radio remained silent. He tried again. This is Flight 281. Static. If anyone can hear me. Nothing. He tried emergency frequencies, military frequencies, random frequencies. At one point he simply held the button and spoke. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 43 years old. I live in Ohio. If someone hears this, tell my wife I. He stopped. Tell her what? That he loved her? She knew. That he was sorry. For what? He couldn't think of anything dramatic enough to justify those words. I'm sorry I forgot to call this morning. The sentence sounded ridiculous. He almost laughed. Instead, he released the button. Static reclaimed the cockpit. When he returned to the cabin, Elias hadn't moved. Daniel sat across the aisle. You hungry? A little. There has to be food. There is. You've eaten? Yes. So we won't starve? No. It was oddly reassuring. Daniel raided the galley. There were meals, sandwiches, crackers, tiny cups of fruit. He carried 2 trays back. Elias accepted one with a nod. Neither spoke while eating. The silence wasn't awkward. It was simply large, like eating in a cathedral. Halfway through his sandwich, Daniel asked, Do you know where we're going? Forward. I mean where we're landing. Elias looked at him. Do you? No. Then we have the same answer. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Daniel walked the length of the cabin again. Every seat became another tiny biography. Seat 4C, a crossword puzzle with only 3 clues remaining. Seat 11A, a knitting project. Half a blue scarf. The knitting needles still threaded through the yarn. Seat 18D, a tiny plastic dinosaur. Seat 23F, a wedding ring resting beside an untouched ginger ale. He picked it up. Gold, warm from the cabin. Someone had taken it off. Why? He slipped it into his pocket. Not to steal it. To keep it from disappearing. Though he wasn't sure why that mattered. He eventually found himself reading boarding passes. Margaret, Luis, Anika, Robert. Tiny names attached to empty seats. He began saying them aloud. Margaret. Silence. Luis. Nothing. It felt important that someone still knew they had been here. He slept again. He hadn't meant to. One moment he was sitting in 21A. The next, bright sunlight flooded the cabin. He blinked. Morning. His watch read 6:11. He looked toward the back. Elias was exactly where he'd been, reading nothing, watching everything. Daniel hurried toward him. How long was I asleep? I don't know. It was night. I know. Now it's morning. Yes. Daniel looked out the window. Clouds. Beautiful white towers reaching toward a brilliant blue sky. The sort of view airlines used in advertisements. He laughed quietly, not because anything was funny, because his mind couldn't find another response. You don't seem surprised. I've already lived through my surprise. What does that mean? It means surprise has an expiration date. Daniel sat beside him. I need real answers. I've given you every real answer I have. You keep speaking like that. Like what? As though everything means something else. Elias considered that. I think everything means exactly what it says. Daniel rubbed his face. Okay. He took a slow breath. I'm going to ask direct questions. All right. Did everyone disappear at the same time? Yes. Did they suffer? No. Did they know? No. Why was I asleep? I don't know. Why weren't you? I don't know. Why us? I don't know. Daniel leaned back. You really don't know? No. You know more than you're telling me. Yes. Daniel waited. Elias continued. And less than you think. Something in that answer settled over Daniel like dust. For the first time, he considered that Elias might not be hiding the truth. He might simply occupy a place where truth had become too large to explain. That afternoon, or what he decided was afternoon, Daniel searched the passenger's luggage. He hated himself for it. It felt invasive, like breaking into strangers' homes. But they weren't here. He found photographs, prescription medication, children's drawings, a violin, a Bible with notes in the margins, a birthday card that had never been opened. He returned everything exactly as he'd found it. Every zipper, every latch, every folded shirt. It felt like an apology. Near the rear of the cabin, he found a disposable camera. He smiled. Who still used these? He wound the film. 23 exposures remained. He took one picture of the empty aisle. Click, one of the cockpit. Click, one of Elias. Click. The older man looked at the lens but said nothing. You don't mind? No. I just want proof. For whom? Daniel lowered the camera. He hadn't thought of that. Later, while staring out the window, he noticed something strange. The clouds weren't moving. They should have been. At 500 miles an hour, clouds passed beneath an airplane almost imperceptibly, but they passed. These didn't. He pressed his forehead against the glass. One enormous cloud shaped vaguely like a hand remained beneath the left wing. Minute after minute, unchanged. He hurried to the cockpit. The instruments still showed cruising speed. Impossible. He returned to the window. The cloud remained, exactly where it had been, as though the airplane moved, but space itself did not. That evening, sunset returned. The second one, or third. Daniel no longer knew. He found Elias watching the horizon. Can I ask you something? You always do. Have you ever seen another plane? No. A bird? No. Anything? Elias smiled faintly. Once. Daniel leaned forward. What? A balloon. A balloon? Red. What happened to it? It drifted past. Where did it come from? I don't know. Where did it go? I don't know. Daniel stared. You're making that up? No. You expect me to believe there was just a balloon? I don't expect anything. The sun touched the horizon. Orange spread across the clouds. Daniel watched the colors change. Beautiful. Indifferent. He spoke almost to himself. I keep thinking about everyone. So do I. I wonder if they're scared. I don't think so. You think they're dead? I didn't say that. No, you didn't. Elias nodded. I've learned something. What? There are questions that feel important because they're frightening. Daniel waited. And there are questions that are important even after the fear has gone. Night swallowed the airplane again. This time Daniel didn't go to sleep. He wanted to watch it happen. Hour after hour he remained awake, watching, listening, counting the seconds between the blinking wingtip light. He must have drifted off anyway, because when he opened his eyes, sunlight again, he looked immediately at his watch. It now read 6:11. Exactly. Not 6:12. Not 6:10. 6:11. He frowned. He opened his phone. 6:11. The same minute. The same time as yesterday, or whatever yesterday meant. He walked quickly toward Elias. Without looking away from the window, the older man spoke. It bothers you now. Daniel stopped. What does? The clocks. Yes, it bothered me too. For how long? Elias was quiet. Long enough that Daniel wondered if he hadn't heard. Finally he answered. I don't remember. Daniel looked at him. You don't remember? No. What don't you remember? Elias turned his head slightly. Just enough for Daniel to see the smallest hint of uncertainty pass across his face. I don't remember how long I've been forgetting things. The words landed softly, but they echoed through Daniel's mind with the weight of an impact. He suddenly realized he couldn't remember the name of the airport where he'd boarded. He could picture the terminal, the rain, the sandwich, the woman who'd asked if he was going home. But the city's name, it hovered just beyond reach. He frowned, searching harder. Nothing. A tiny absence, no bigger than a missing key on a keyboard. Yet somehow it frightened him more than the empty airplane ever had. Because empty airplanes belong to impossible worlds. Forgetting belonged to this one. Daniel did not mention the airport again. He told himself there was no point. People forgot names all the time. A restaurant, an actor, the neighbor who always waved but whose name had never quite settled into memory. It happened. The mind misplaced things. It wasn't evidence of anything. Still, he found himself quietly testing himself throughout what he continued calling the day. His wife's birthday. Easy. October 14th. His wedding anniversary. June 22nd. The street where he grew up. Maple Avenue. No. Maple Street. He frowned. No. It wasn't either of those. He could see the house perfectly. White siding. Green shutters. The basketball hoop his father had mounted slightly crooked above the garage. The maple tree in the front yard. The mailbox leaning just enough to irritate his mother every time she drove past it. Everything was vivid, except the street's name. He stopped trying. The cabin had begun to feel familiar. almost comfortable. That realization disturbed him. Human beings, he thought, could normalize anything, even this. He knew where the good coffee was kept. He knew which overhead bin held extra blankets. He knew the left rear lavatory door squeaked. He knew seat 14C reclined farther than the others because something inside its mechanism had worn down. He knew that every morning, if morning was the right word, sunlight entered through the windows on the left side of the aircraft. He also knew that every evening, it sat in exactly the same place. The horizon never changed. The clouds were never different. The world outside behaved like a painting. Only the light moved. You've noticed. Daniel looked toward the back. Elias hadn't turned around. Noticed what? You stopped looking outside. I have. Yesterday you looked every few minutes. Daniel realized he was right. Now he rarely glanced through the windows. There was nothing to learn from them. Nothing waiting. No rescue. No destination. Just another sunrise. Another sunset. Another empty sky. Can I ask you something? You will. Daniel smiled despite himself. I hate that you're right. I know. Have you always talked like this? No. What were you like before? Silence. Long enough that Daniel wondered if, for the first time, he had asked something Elias truly couldn't answer. Finally, I don't remember. You don't remember your life. I remember pieces. Like what? Elias leaned back slightly. I remember building something. What? I don't know. I remember laughing very hard one afternoon. What were you laughing about? I don't know. I remember someone singing while washing dishes. Your wife? I don't know. Daniel stared at him. Doesn't that bother you? It did. What changed? I stopped believing memory belonged to me. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It belongs to whoever remembers. The sentence lingered. Daniel walked away without replying. He wandered through first class. A leather notebook lay open on one seat. Inside, someone had been writing a letter. The handwriting was neat. The page ended halfway through a sentence. By the time you read this, I hope you'll understand why. Nothing after that. No signature. No explanation. He turned the page. Blank. Every remaining page. Blank. He closed the notebook gently. I'm sorry, he whispered to no one. He had begun apologizing to objects, to abandoned luggage, to untouched meals, to reading glasses. It seemed appropriate somehow. The plane had become a museum. Each seat an exhibit titled "Someone Was Here." Later, he found himself standing in the middle of the aisle, trying to remember his father's voice, not his face. That came instantly. Gray hair, broad shoulders, the habit of rubbing his chin whenever he was thinking. Daniel remembered fishing trips, changing the oil together, a terrible joke about ducks that had somehow become family legend. He remembered his father laughing. He remembered laughing with him. But the sound, the actual sound, was gone. He closed his eyes. Nothing, not even an echo. His chest tightened. No. He tried harder. Nothing. It felt impossible. How could you remember someone laughing without remembering the laugh? He stood there for a long time, then quietly sat down in the nearest seat. Elias spoke without looking back. You've reached that part. What part? The sounds. Daniel's head snapped up. You knew. Yes, you knew this would happen. It happened to me. Daniel walked quickly toward him. What else? Elias hesitated, then answered. Smells. What? You'll forget smells. Daniel almost laughed. That's ridiculous. I know. But you will. He didn't believe him. Until lunch, or dinner, or whatever meal it was. Daniel opened a packet of coffee. He inhaled. Nothing. Not because it had no smell. Because he couldn't remember what coffee used to smell like. He knew the scent should be familiar, comforting, morning, routine. But there was no comparison left inside him. It was simply the smell of this packet. Nothing more. He closed his eyes. His hands began to shake. I'm disappearing. Elias didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, No, it feels like it. I know. I'm losing pieces of myself. Yes. Daniel stared at him. And you're sitting there acting like that's normal. No, it's happening. I know. Then why aren't you helping me? Elias looked out the window. I am. Daniel's voice cracked. How? I'm remembering you. The words struck harder than Daniel expected. He sat down. Not because he wanted to. Because his knees suddenly felt unreliable. Hours later, or perhaps days, he asked quietly, Is that why you're here? Partly. To remember me? Yes. Why? So you don't vanish all at once. The engines hummed, always humming. Daniel wondered if silence still existed anywhere. That evening, sunset again. He watched the light spill across the wing. Then he noticed something. The wing looked older, just slightly. The paint near the tip had begun to fade. A line of tiny cracks had appeared near one inspection panel. He walked closer to the window. Yesterday. Had those been there yesterday? He couldn't tell. Maybe, maybe not. He hurried to the cockpit. The instrument panel still glowed, but one display flickered, just once, then stabilized. He looked at the fuel gauge, still half full. Exactly. Needle unmoving. He frowned. Machines aged. Fuel disappeared. Nothing on this airplane obeyed time correctly, except the airplane itself. It was wearing out, very slowly, like something that had been flying far longer than its designers intended. He returned to Elias. The plane's changing. I know. Why? I don't know. You always say that. Because it's true. Daniel laughed bitterly. You know what I miss? What? Someone pretending they know. For the first time, Elias smiled. A genuine smile. Small. Almost invisible. I remember people doing that. Daniel laughed. Really laughed. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was real. The sound startled both of them. The cabin felt different afterward. Less empty, as though laughter itself occupied space. Tell me about Earth. Daniel blinked. What? Tell me something. You've lived there. I know. But tell me anyway. Daniel thought. Okay. He leaned back. There are these mornings in late autumn. He stopped. No. He tried again. The air. He frowned. What does cold feel like? He knew. Of course he knew. Didn't he? He searched. Words came. Not sensations. It's. He closed his eyes. I know the definition. He opened them again. I can't remember the feeling. Neither man spoke. Eventually Daniel whispered. I think that's worse. What is? Forgetting experiences. Elias nodded. Yes. I still know snow exists. Yes. But I don't remember standing in it. No. Night arrived. The cabin lights dimmed automatically. Outside, the stars appeared. Daniel sat upright. They hadn't seen stars before. Thousands of them. Brilliant. Unmoving. He walked to the window. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He couldn't explain why. Then he realized. The constellations. They were almost right. Orion's belt. 3 stars, but one sat too high. The Big Dipper curved the wrong direction. The North Star wasn't where it belonged. It looked like someone had reconstructed the night sky from memory. Close enough that most people would never notice. Wrong enough that anyone who loved looking upward would feel uneasy without knowing why. He hurried to Elias. The stars. I know. They're wrong. Yes. Why? I don't know. Daniel sighed. I knew. He looked out again. The strange constellations stretched forever. Beautiful. Carefully incorrect. Then, something moved. Far off the left wing. A tiny white light. Not blinking. Not an aircraft beacon. Just drifting. He pressed against the glass. What is that? Elias stood. For the first time since Daniel had awakened. Slowly, carefully, he walked to the window beside him. The light floated silently through the darkness. Neither approaching nor retreating. Just passing. Elias watched it with an expression Daniel had never seen before. Not fear. Not curiosity. Recognition. Very quietly, almost to himself, Elias said, It's been a long time. What is it? I don't know. Have you seen one before? Yes. What happened? It kept going. The light continued drifting through the impossible stars until it became too small to distinguish from them. Elias remained standing long after it had vanished. His shoulders had changed somehow, less certain. Daniel looked at him. You thought you were alone. Elias closed his eyes. For just a moment. Then, in a voice barely louder than the engines, he admitted, So did I. For the first time since Daniel had awakened on the empty airplane, Elias looked like someone who was lost. Not confused. Not afraid. Lost. There was a difference. Confusion belonged to people who believed answers existed somewhere nearby. Being lost belonged to people who had begun to question whether there was a destination at all. Daniel noticed it because he recognized it. He had spent the last several days or weeks or whatever existed inside this strange stretch of time, feeling exactly the same way. He had just never seen it on anyone else's face, especially not Elias. What was it? Elias returned to his seat. I don't know. Daniel almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was becoming absurd. You really are committed to that answer. It is an honest answer. Do you ever get tired of not knowing? Elias looked toward the ceiling. Every day. Daniel froze. Every day. A pause. Then Elias corrected himself. I think. Daniel sat down across the aisle. You don't know if you have days. No. You don't know how long you've been here. No. You don't know what that light was. No. You don't know where everyone went. No. Daniel looked out the window. And somehow you're still calm. Elias looked at him. I didn't say I was calm. The statement stayed with Daniel, because it was true. He had mistaken silence for peace, stillness for acceptance. But perhaps Elias wasn't peaceful. Perhaps he was simply exhausted. A person could stop fighting a storm without ever becoming comfortable with the rain. The next cycle began. Morning, then afternoon, then sunset, then darkness, then morning again. Daniel stopped naming them. Names implied certainty, and certainty had become a luxury. He kept a journal. At least, he tried. The notebook came from a passenger's bag, a black leather cover. No name, no initials, just blank pages. He wrote everything down: the date, the time, questions, observations, memories. At first, the handwriting was neat, organized, practical, like a report. Day unknown. Everyone is gone. Plane still flying. Elias knows more than he says. Later. Day unknown. Saw strange light. Stars are wrong. Forgot airport name. Later. Day unknown. I remember my wife. I remember her hair, her laugh, her hands. I cannot remember the sound of her voice. That last sentence made him stop. He stared at it for a long time, because the person who wrote those words was still him, but already a little less. Why don't you write? Daniel looked up. Elias was standing beside him. You mean a journal? Yes, because I don't want to forget. Elias nodded. I understand. Why don't you? The older man looked at the notebook. I did. What happened? I filled them. How many? Elias looked away. I don't know. Daniel felt cold despite the warm cabin air. How long have you been here? Elias didn't answer. Daniel waited. Finally, I don't remember the beginning. The engines continued. Tell me something. Elias looked over. About what? Anything. Daniel thought. About Earth. A faint smile appeared. You already asked that. I know. You couldn't remember snow. I know. Now? Daniel closed his eyes. Snow. He searched for it. White. Cold. Winter. Children laughing. A shovel. A driveway. He could still find pieces, but they were becoming like photographs left underwater. The edges were soft. The colors running. I remember that it mattered. Elias nodded. That's something. Daniel looked at him. Is that what happens? What? We don't forget the things themselves. No. We forget why they mattered. Yes. That frightened him more than losing details. A person could survive losing a name, a street, a smell. But losing why something mattered, that was different. That was losing the invisible thread connecting everything. The next time he slept, he dreamed. He dreamed he was standing in his childhood home. He walked through rooms. Everything was exactly right. The furniture, the walls, the pictures. But every photograph had been replaced with blank white squares. Every book contained empty pages. Every clock had no hands. He walked outside. The mailbox was there. The tree was there. The basketball hoop was there. But the house number was missing. The street sign was blank. The entire world looked like it had been carefully recreated by someone who had heard descriptions but never actually been there. He woke crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just tears running down his face. Elias noticed. What did you lose? Daniel wiped his eyes. Nothing. Elias waited. Daniel looked out the window. I dreamed about home, and I couldn't find it. For a while, neither spoke. Then Elias said, that was my first dream too. Daniel looked over. Your first? Yes. What happened? I woke up, and I realized I couldn't remember what home was. The confession hung between them. The man in the back row was no longer a mysterious figure. Not entirely. He was something worse. He was proof. Proof that this could continue. Proof that Daniel might eventually become exactly like him. What happens when you forget everything? Elias looked at the empty cabin. I don't know. Daniel smiled sadly. That answer again. Yes. Do you think you'll disappear? No. Then what? Elias looked toward the front of the plane. I think I'll continue. That's it? Maybe that's all anyone does. The airplane trembled. Both men looked up. For the first time, real turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated. A familiar sound. A tiny piece of normal life. Daniel almost laughed. Of all things. Elias looked confused. What? The seatbelt sign. It still works. I know. Why does that surprise you? Because everything else is impossible. A small smile. People often trust small familiar things more than large truths. The turbulence increased. The overhead lights flickered. The engines changed pitch. Daniel gripped the armrest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was afraid. Not existentially, not philosophically, just normally. A human being sitting on an airplane experiencing turbulence. And somehow, that was comforting. The shaking stopped. The lights stabilized. The plane continued. Daniel breathed out. I hated that. I know. But I kind of missed it. Elias looked at him. The fear. The normal fear. Elias smiled. A real smile. Then something strange happened. He laughed. Quietly. Only once. But he laughed. Daniel stared. What? Nothing. No, you laughed. So did you. I haven't heard you laugh before. Neither have I. They both sat quietly. Two people on an impossible airplane, laughing because something had finally gone wrong in a way they understood. Later, Daniel opened his journal. He wrote, "Today the plane had turbulence." He stopped, then added, "I was happy." He looked at the words. Happy. Such a simple word. Such a fragile thing. A person could spend an entire lifetime chasing it. And here it was, found in a shaking airplane that should not exist. The sun rose again. But this time, something was different. Daniel noticed immediately. The clouds below them were changing. Not frozen. Not repeated. Changing. Slowly. The first real change. He stood. Elias. The older man looked. Below them, land. Not familiar. Not any place Daniel recognized. But land. Green. Blue. Brown. A planet. A real one. Or something close enough. Daniel's heart raced. Are we landing? Elias watched silently. I don't know. Stop saying that. I wish I could. The aircraft began descending. Slowly. Almost gently. The altitude numbers changed. 30,000. 25. 20. Daniel held his breath. After all this time, after all the questions, after all the impossible things, they were finally going somewhere. The clouds rose around them. White. Thick. Endless. The airplane passed through. For several minutes there was nothing. No sky. No ground. Only cloud. Then, light. Daniel looked out and saw something that made him forget every question. Below them was a city. Not a familiar city. Not one from Earth. At least not one he knew. But a city. Lights. Roads. Buildings. Movement. Life. His breath caught. There are people. Elias stood beside him, watching. The city grew larger. Closer. Daniel could see vehicles. Structures. Thousands of tiny signs of existence. We're not alone. Elias didn't answer. Daniel turned. Elias. The older man wasn't looking at the city. He was looking at Daniel. And for the first time, Daniel saw fear. Not for himself. For Daniel. What's wrong? Elias swallowed. A small human gesture. A very old gesture. I remember now. Daniel felt the words before he understood them. Remember what? Elias looked back toward the city. When I first woke up, Daniel waited. I asked the same questions. The engines lowered. The landing gear began to extend. Daniel's hands tightened. What happened? Elias looked at him. I landed. A silence. Then what? Elias looked down. At his hands. At his reflection in the window. Then back at Daniel. I don't remember. The plane descended. The city waited below. Daniel looked around the cabin. The empty seats. The forgotten belongings. The abandoned lives. All of it. A thought came to him. A terrible thought. A beautiful thought. Maybe the plane had never been carrying people from one place to another. Maybe it had been carrying something much heavier. Memories. Stories. All the tiny invisible things that made a person more than matter. Maybe that was why it continued. Because somewhere, somehow, someone had to remember. The wheels touched the ground. Softly. Almost silently. The aircraft rolled. No announcement. No applause. No relief. Just movement. Forward. Always forward. The plane came to a stop. Daniel waited. The doors opened. Warm air entered the cabin. He looked at Elias. The older man remained seated. Aren't you coming? Elias looked toward the open door. Then back at Daniel. I don't know. Daniel smiled. For some reason that answer no longer bothered him. That's okay. Elias looked surprised. Is it? Daniel thought about it. About the empty plane. The missing passengers. The fading memories. The universe that never promised to explain itself. Yeah. He stood. Sometimes it has to be. Daniel walked down the aisle. Past empty seats. Past abandoned belongings. Past everything that had once mattered to someone. At the door he stopped. He looked back. Elias. The man looked up. Thank you. For what? Daniel thought. The answer was simple, but impossible to explain. For remembering me, he stepped onto the ground. Behind him, the engines continued humming, quietly, patiently. The airplane waited. Years later, if years existed there, if time still meant what it once meant, Daniel would sometimes wonder about the airplane, about the man in the last row, about all the people who had disappeared without saying goodbye. He would wonder if they had gone somewhere, if they had simply ended, if they had become something else. He would wonder if the universe noticed. The answer, he suspected, was no. The universe did not keep records. It did not mourn. It did not celebrate. It simply continued. And perhaps that was the strangest and most beautiful part. Because in a place that cared nothing about them, humans had cared about everything. They named stars. They painted pictures. They wrote songs. They held hands. They remembered each other. For a brief moment, in an enormous silence, the universe became aware of itself through them. And maybe that was enough. Somewhere above an endless sky, an airplane continued flying. No destination, no schedule, no reason, just movement.